This is a relay project.
Real Talk starts right now. Here's Ryan Jesperson.
It's December 7th. It is Wednesday. We welcome you to Real Talk. Ryan Jesperson, John Hicks here with you. In just a second, Dr. Lise Gotell, a professor of women's and gender studies, is going to join us from Halifax. We appreciate her checking in. She's been doing some work out east, in particular, recently in Ottawa, talking about the National Association of Women and the Law's involvement in the Violence Against Women Working Group. This, of course, has, I shouldn't say of course, but this has to do with Bill C-21, the gun control bill that we've been talking about. And that is the subject center stage in this week's edition as well of Seriously, our podcast project. Supriya Dwivedi and myself, we push that out every Wednesday morning, bright and early. You get a half hour a week where Supriya and I cut through the noise of the national stories, making what we deem to be the most significant news. And in this case, it is C-21, the episode Gunning for Compromise. You can let us know what you think when you check it out anywhere you get your podcasts. And by the time you hear this on Real Talk, it'll probably be available and uploaded on our YouTube channel as well. You can check out all the details at seriouslypod.com. A little later on in the show, we're going to talk to some research scientists out of, there's a research professor, a researcher out of the University of Calgary that have been doing extensive studies of sport. And of course, with the World Cup going on right now, there are soccer implications. There are obviously hockey implications as well when we talk about sexism and some of the issues that have been plaguing Hockey Canada, the scandal that just had the doors blown off that national organization this year. Dr. Michael Kehler, Dr. Gabriel Knott-Fayle will join us a little later on in the show. We've got a great email from Neil that I received. We've solicited your take on this national debate about guns in Canada. It's much different than the debate in the United States, isn't it? But not entirely. And I've had that reiterated to me with a couple of tweets that I've put out, some of the comments I've received from Canadian gun owners. I've appreciated them as they've fueled a more informed conversation. Most of them, not all of them. Neil's email is the exact type of correspondence we look for. It's thoughtful. He digs into his perspective. He provides us some relevant background. And I give you my word, we're going to read that before the end of the show today. Plus, we're going to take you out of the mountains. Every Wednesday, we get to go out to the mountains, Johnny.
I love it.
MyJasper Memories and our friends at Tourism Jasper have come up with a great idea, I thought, for this time of year. Yeah. They've got 3 perfect gifts for the person in your life that is most difficult to buy for.
Yeah.
And they all have the opportunity to get you out to Jasper National Park. So
if they like the outdoors, it's easy, though,
it's
right?
nice and easy. And then, of course, we have to talk about what I came across in a big box store.
I saw.
Just yesterday. Did you see this tweet that I pushed out? You want to put this photo up on the screen so we can show everybody?
Before you sent me this, my wife sent me this the day before. She saw it as well.
And her thoughts on the KFC 11 herb and spice fried chicken scented fire log.
She says the only thing she wants to smell around the holidays is apple cider, cinnamon, and pine, not 11 herbs and spices.
Yeah, I find that hard to believe that in your plant-based household you guys aren't going to be burning chicken-flavored fire logs. We've got a lot of people chiming in on this. I threw it out on Twitter. You can follow me at Ryan Jesperson. Carly says everybody got one of these in their stocking at my family Christmas a couple years ago. She says the packaging is coated to smell like chicken, but the actual log is just compressed paper. Doesn't smell like anything. It's all chicken hype.
I was going to say, do your fingers get all greasy when you're loading this into the fire?
I wonder after you load it in. Yeah, you lick your fingers just like you do with the chicken. I don't know. A girl named Carl chimes in, says, I bought this for a few people last year. My brother is celiac and can't have KFC anymore, so he got a kick out of being tortured. Amy is just like me, both disgusted and intrigued, which I thought kind of nailed it. Amy Langer has been a great friend of the show, says, you're just discovering this? She says, I highly recommend you buy one for shits and giggles. And Eon says, under no circumstances open this inside your home. It will smell of KFC for ages. Speaking from experience. Mm-hmm. They say that like that's a bad thing.
That's what I'd be afraid of. Is it getting all into the drapes and everything? And then
That might be the point.
You know, when you drive by like a McDonald's or a it's oh my God, it's the lure, right? And then having that smell in your house for weeks after
That's
the
the whole point, isn't it? Isn't that why people would buy something like this?
100%.
The exact reason why? I think that's exactly why. Lise Gotell is coming up in 90 seconds. We wanted to let you know that the holiday sales are continuing right now at McBain Camera. There are 6 locations. You can visit them in person, or you can shop from the comfort of your own home right now at McBainCamera.com. You can save up to $450 on Canon cameras and lenses during McBain's holiday sale, including saving $100 on that sleek, lightweight Canon EOS R10. This is a fantastic unit for 15 frame per second continuous shooting, lightning fast autofocus. So you're shooting, your kids going bonkers on Christmas morning, or sports or wildlife or whatever the case may be. You can pick up the Canon EOS R10 for just $1329.99 at McBain right now and get a free Roots Messenger bag. Absolutely beautiful in that charcoal gray color. You can check out McBainCamera.com to see amazing deals on Canon gear, including as well the EOS R5, the R6, the Rebel SL3, and much more. Remember that all purchases at McBain are backed by a 30-day price protection, which allows you to shop with confidence this holiday season. You're not all of a sudden going to find a better deal and get screwed out of your hard-earned money. You're guaranteed the lowest price at McBain, where you can create to inspire. Also, big shout out to our friends at Park Power. They're powering our hashtag Real Talk RJ, this show and every show. They're not going to hide the reality. They're not going to try to pretend like you're not going to be using more electricity or natural gas these days. This time of year, the days are shorter, the nights are colder. But why not pay as little as possible? That's the goal that they're putting in front of you as your friendly local utilities provider. If you bundle their services, you're going to save money on admin costs. Plus, you might be surprised at what the little guy here can give you. Move away from the big corporation. Go to the family-owned Park Power. You'll find that it pays in more ways than one, including the promo code 2022-RealTalk. It'll save you $70 off your first bill, and this might light a fire under you. Just about 3 weeks left to use that promo code, so today is a perfect day to bring your business to Park Power. It's also a great day to think about where you're at with your renewable energy goals. Enter Kubi Energy into the chat. At kubienergy.ca, you'll be able to learn more about the average solar panel system. When we're talking the average Canadian home, you're talking like 12 to 25 grand. The prices come down. Reliability's gone way up. I mean, the lifespan of these panels right now, about 30 years. And there's some myth busting to check out on their website as well. A lot of people, for example, think that in the winter months, your solar panels are useless. That is a story from 10 years ago. The advancements are significant. You don't have to pack your basement with batteries. That's all old school thinking. Kubi's on top of the latest developments. You can check out their blog link. Get your frequently asked questions covered at kubienergy.ca. Yesterday, the entire country mourned the loss of 14 innocent lives, women, mechanical engineering students in particular, that were gunned down, that were killed in an anti-feminist mass shooting at Montreal's École Polytechnique on December 6, 1989. We talked about it on this show. Politicians were talking about it across the country. Advocates, intellectuals, people that are working on the front lines of preventing violent attacks like this, in particular, domestic violence and other gun-related crimes. Dr. Lise Gotell is a professor in the Department of Women and Gender Studies, University of Alberta, has dedicated her academic career to improving the experience of survivors in the criminal justice system. She's a member of the National Steering Committee of the National Association of Women in Law, and she chairs the Violence Against Women Working Group. Over this past week, as mentioned earlier, she was in Ottawa discussing, in part, the NAWL's submission on the federal gun control bill, that's C-21. She joins us live from Halifax today. Wonderful to have you back on the show. Thank you for making time for us.
Great to see you, Ryan.
People that follow you on Twitter at Lise Gott saw some of your reflections yesterday on the anniversary of that horrific mass shooting in Montreal. How did you observe it personally, and did it resonate any differently this year, considering the national conversation that we're having on gun control?
Yeah, I mean, I always like to think about that slogan that feminists came up with just after the Montreal massacre. First mourn, work for, and then work for change. And that's something that I think that we have to, keep in mind on the anniversary. So I always think of that, and I always challenge myself to work for change. And that's why I get involved with and support organizations like the National Association of Women in the Law. I was at a meeting this weekend, and it is an organization that has been working on violence against women for the past 35 years.
What sort of progress have you seen, like with regards to meaningful progress over those, the number of years at least that you've been involved?
Right. I mean, I do think that the national conversation is changing. So we've seen a real reckoning, for example, around sexual violence. And I think, you're going to have a discussion later. I wish I could be around for that, about the Hockey Canada scandal. And, it's quite possible that this is hockey's Me Too moment. So I think we're seeing a changing national conversation around sexual violence in particular, perhaps not so much though around domestic violence. And unfortunately, too many things have just simply not changed. We've seen uh, more conversation, we've seen changes in law, but when we get down to the ground, the rates of domestic violence and sexual violence are just as high now as they were several decades ago. And also the organizations like the shelters and sexual assault centers that are working on the front lines of this crisis are very, very underfunded. I was talking just last week to Mary Jane James from the Sexual Assault Center of Edmonton, and she mentioned that their waiting list for counseling is 12 to 14 months right now. Um, Thousands of women and children are being turned away from our shelters in Alberta every year. So way too much has not changed. And the other thing that I just have to mention is that organizations like shelters are staffed by women who are poorly paid. They haven't had raises in 8 years. There's a huge turnover because of that. It's that has not changed. It hasn't changed in 40 years. And so as a society, we need to be doing better on this.
Isn't it strange that, like, when we look at some of the callings, like not even really jobs, they're callings, I think, that we rely on in our society, like shelter workers, for example, that are assisting typically women and children that are fleeing domestic violence, or it could be people working on the front lines in harm reduction type situations, supervised consumption and the like. It could be, I think of people like when we look at the elder care abuse scandals that we saw across the country, in particular over the past few years in Ontario in particular, but not limited to there, obviously. And a lot of the workers that are in those types of centers, these are oftentimes our fellow citizens that are working in the most stressful imaginable circumstances, and they're oftentimes the least compensated. I mean, a lot of people in these types of situations are earning minimum wage or right around there. It's something I think we need to have a bigger conversation about, because on one hand, I understand people say, well, you can't just, I was talking to somebody about, ambulatory care in the province, or first response, paramedics, how long it's taking them to get to calls. A firefighter says to me, he goes, I don't think you can just throw money at the problem. He says, I think it's bigger than just throwing money at the problem. But in some circumstances, money is one of the solutions. Funding is one of the solutions. I mean, that's unacceptable that it would take someone, a survivor of sexual assault as an example, over a year to line up a conversation with a counselor. I mean, how do we expect anybody to make any progress there?
Exactly. And, you have to, understand that SAFE has 12 counselors. They each see 5 clients every day.
Wow.
So that's a lot of women. And it's still, I mean, the rates are just so bad. But yeah, I mean, you're pointing to a really important problem. A lot of this is so-called caring work. It's a kind of work that we, expect women to do either for no pay or for low pay. And that's going to change, right? So, like, why are some of the trades, male-dominated trades, so well compensated compared to this kind of work, which is crucial, It's highly skilled. And really, honestly, without better pay, these organizations are not going to be able to retain the skilled women who work in these jobs. And it's, we have to have this conversation. It's just also, we need governments to be taking leadership. These are social problems, and pushing this problem down onto the backs of, low paid women workers or volunteer workers, it's just not going to change anything. Governments need to be taking leadership. A few years ago, Justice Canada did a study, and it estimated that the annual costs of violence, gender-based violence, is in the neighborhood of $12 billion a year. Let's invest in this problem.
Can you talk to us a little bit? I mean, when we talk about Bill C-21, there are so many angles that we can look at this from. I mean, some people are going to want to talk about sports shooting. Some people want to talk about handguns. Some people want to talk about protecting their rural properties, and they have valid points there. Some people are hunters. Some people are victims of gun violence. Some people are, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. In the context of your involvement and what you were doing in Ottawa and the submission that the National Association of Women in the Law made in the context of Bill C-21, can you take us into it and give us a couple things to think about as we as civilians sort of try to form our opinions on this gun control bill?
Right. I mean, that gun control bill is, first of all, it's super complicated. It's a large bill. There are many parts of the bill. And, the organization, it's called Police Se Souvient. It's an organization that represents many of women's organization representing many of the survivors of the massacre. Police Se Souvient has been taking the lead on trying to get into law a ban on the kind of guns specifically, which is still legal actually, and the sort of guns that were used in the Montreal massacre. So what this bill does, first of all, is that it does fulfill the Liberal promise to define those assault-style semi-automatic weapons, the kind that were used, the kind of gun that was used in the Montreal massacre. So, here we're talking about more specifically for people like me who don't know anything about guns, the kind of guns where you don't have to change a magazine and you just press the trigger and the gun will continue shooting, right? So that's what we're talking about here, and that's what Police Se Souvient in particular has been engaged in trying to ban. But in addition, this bill really is also trying to get at some of the links between gun violence and domestic violence. When we think about gun violence, we're often, thinking about, gang violence and, urban shootings and so on. But the fact of the matter is that guns are a huge factor in domestic violence, and they're a risk factor for femicide. So the organization that I work with, the National Association of Women in the Law, and just to be clear, I'm not a spokesperson for the organization. I chair their Violence Against Women working group and was involved in the production of this bill, but I'm not a spokesperson. So I'm speaking for myself about their submission. But their submission really is about those connections between gun violence and domestic violence. Now, we need to think about gun violence in a gendered way. So very few women are licensed gun owners, but women are twice as likely as men to be either threatened by or to be the victim of a gun assault. So it is gendered, and we need to be thinking about the links between domestic violence and gun violence. And the bill does try to do that. So, for example, the bill says that if you have committed domestic violence, on that basis, the chief firearms officer can revoke your gun license, right? So, or if you've been subject to a protection order, your gun license can be suspended. Now, what our submission is doing is trying to get into those provisions of the bill and to make them stronger. So, for example, the bill doesn't define domestic violence, and we believe that it needs to have a clear definition of domestic violence, particularly because, in part, it's the chief firearms officers that are going to be required to interpret it. And they don't have a lot of experience with domestic violence, right? And in addition, there's another provision of the bill that says that it's called the red flag provision that allows anyone to go to a judge and apply for an emergency protection order against someone you fear will be using gun in a violent crime. But like currently, you can just call the police and raise this, and it's their job to investigate this. And we're afraid that going to a judge and requesting a protection order isn't really practical. It's not, and it's also kind of risky for someone who's being subjected, in particular, to domestic violence. So those are the kinds of the provisions of the bill that we're particularly interested in. But it's Pauli-Souvian that has been really taking the lead on, the ban on semi-automatic weapons. So
maybe I don't even know if I mean what I'm about to say. I was going to say maybe one of the best things that could ever happen to Pauli-Souvian was this ridiculous, this deplorable kind of promo code thing that Canadian Coalition for Firearms Rights put out. And the reason I say that is because it put Pauli-Souvian on the radar of so many people where I think it may not have been before, not diminishing the work that they've been doing, the advocacy they've been doing, but a lot of, myself included, Lisa, I'd never heard of them. And I'm reading into this, I see this promo code. I haven't really pulled any punches on it. I think it's unbelievable what they've done. The optics of it, just it's gross. But I wasn't familiar with the group before, and I think that has put it on people's radar. I don't even know if there's anything that you want to say about that promo code story. It's just so ridiculous. The insensitivity of it, the kind of the gross nature of it. I was left, short of words, which rarely happens.
Yeah, people have used disrespectful, disgusting to describe this. And to be clear, it is a marketing. They were very this is a marketing ploy by this organization. Sure. It's being deliberately provocative. They're trying to sell gun merchandise, clothing, using this promo code. I think it's kind of like the equivalent of using a George Floyd meme to sell some kind of merchandise. It's just awful. But maybe you're right. Maybe it is the case that this has raised awareness among people who might not have been following the debate around gun control and the activism of Pauli-Souvian. That organization has been primarily active in Quebec. It is a francophone organization. Its website's in French. So yeah, it's quite possible that this controversy has raised some awareness around their work. But you're going to be talking about the Hockey Canada scandal later, but there's that link between Pauli and this act of disrespect and hockey, because of course Carey Price put up that Instagram post speaking in favorable terms about that promo code Pauli with himself in assault style dressed in camo, I should say. So, and he first claimed that he really hadn't known about the Montreal massacre. That's incredible. The man, this is a solemn occasion that is marked every year in Montreal. I don't know how someone who plays for the Canadians knew nothing about this. And it just goes to show that hockey players live in a kind of celebrity elite bubble. But that was awful, right? So I don't know. It's disrespectful, disgusting.
Supriya and we get into it, and seriously, it just came out today, and I kind of go on this big thing of and Supriya says she wants to be clear. She goes, she says, I'm not the type that says athletes need to, stay in their lane or whatever. She says she feels like it's okay for him to share his opinion. I think he got duped, to be honest with you. I think he got taken advantage of. I think that somebody got in his ear. I think there's a very good chance that he's ignorant about it. I certainly don't speak for him. I don't know him, but I just felt like for a guy like that, of that stature in Montreal, he will be a Hall of Famer. He's one of the great all-time Montreal Canadiens without a Stanley Cup, but still. And to put his neck out there like that a couple of days before December 6th, right in the middle of a controversy, it just made, you talk about people that expend their social capital, like it made no sense for him to do that. And I think if he had somebody in his corner that actually cared about him and cared about his reputation and understood where the national conversation is at and understood the pros and the cons list of stepping up to support that type of thing, there's no way in hell that, you look at Lise, I'm not even trying to be funny. Like, hockey players are the most boring interviews of any professional athletes around. I mean, they never get controversial. They never get, maybe the odd one, but yeah, that one just didn't make sense for me. I'm not necessarily going to bat for Carey Price. I just thought that, it's just, to me, you live 13 years in Montreal as one of the great goaltenders to ever play for that franchise. Like, are you telling me that they never had a home game on December 6th? They never paused for a moment of remembrance? There was never a moment of silence? I don't believe it. And it's like, you and I, we both call Edmonton. I think you're still calling Edmonton home, right? Yeah, you're still, aren't you?
Yeah. I'm just out looking after my sick dad.
Well, thank you for making time for us. But imagine somebody that lived 15 years in Edmonton saying they'd never heard of the tornado. It just wouldn't. You just wouldn't be able to wrap your mind around it. It just wouldn't make any sense.
Yeah, it doesn't make a lot of sense. And, surely to God, this guy could be making some more productive use of his time while he's out on injury, right? So,
yeah.
And great that the Canadians are going to sponsor scholarships for so-called underprivileged girls to take STEM camps. But I think maybe a little more is needed here. I don't know what that would be. Somebody suggested maybe that they should be devoting some of their 50-50 funds to violence against women organizations. That might be a better way of marking this.
Sure. And to be quite honest with you,
trying to rectify this, I should say.
Yeah, that stuff's a drop in the bucket. Like they could do that easily. Yeah. They could easily do that. When you're paying your top players $11 million a year, you can find some dough to. People are don't at me about budgets and all that kind of stuff. Well,
that's probably many times the $11 million is probably many times the budget of your average shelter or crisis center, right? So, yeah.
Hey, it's great to see your face. I know that there's a lot of pulls on your time right now, and of course, family obligations as well. We appreciate your expert opinion on this. Thanks for making time for us from Halifax.
No worries. Thanks, Ryan. Thanks for having the conversation.
Oh, of course. Right. Absolutely. That's Dr. Lise Gotell. I encourage you to give her a follow on Twitter at Lise Gott. That's LISEGOT. Comments like this in the live chat piss me off. Tim says, LOL. This would like LOL. Like we're talking about people getting murdered, man. We're talking about domestic violence, people fleeing violent situations, trying to save the lives of themselves and their children, getting shot. And this guy's LOLing. So number one, fuck yourself. But it says this woman's out to lunch. If a human wants you, they will get you. A restraining order is a piece of paper. Okay, well, I guess we should just give up then, Tim, right? Because the restraining order is just a piece of paper. And if someone wants you, they're going to get you. So I guess we'll just let the laws of the jungle play out, right? So Tim doesn't have to surrender his assault rifle. Is that it? He says, take guns away now and then next butter knives. These are the sort of unproductive, immature, ignorant, childish contributions to the debate that I don't think further it at all. If a human wants you, they will get you. Thank God you're not a 911 operator, man. Let me guess, not a counselor. Tim, not a counselor. The new handle for when he chimes in on Real Talk Conversations. You can let us know what you think about this. I want to get to this email in just a second from Neil, and we've also got two guests ready to chime. I mean, isn't this interesting that we don't necessarily plan shows like this? This isn't a themed episode, so to speak, but we're going to talk to two researchers that have been doing deep dives into some of the culture of sport. We want to, as we promise you, that these conversations continue. I mean, the Hockey Canada scandal, that story's not gone anywhere. And there's a World Cup of football, of soccer angle on this as well. Our conversation there coming up too. And these are presented by sponsors that believe in the importance of informed dialogue. They believe in the importance of educating ourselves to better ground our perspectives. That includes the team at Athabasca University. It's Canada's open university. Now, what's so different about AU? The experience is different from other universities by design because they're more accessible, more flexible, more equitable, more personalized for everybody. It's sure to have something that meets your needs at Athabasca University, meets your ambitions, fits your lifestyle. You can get a Canadian education online with AU no matter where you live. That's right, your tablet, your laptop, that's your access to AU. And if you need to take some time off, family vacation, maybe an illness in the family, maybe you just need a mental health break, maybe you need to shut it all down, Johnny, close the laptop, sign out of your Netflix, and go for long walks in the woods.
I recommend that twice a week.
Athabasca University will be there for you when you get back with their world-class accredited online programs and courses. You can check out how AU works today at athabascau.ca. Hey, this is a huge month at Friesen Brothers. They've got their Christmas dinner boxes ready for order at friesen.com right now, Freson.com. Make it a December to remember. The Ukrainian-inspired Christmas dinner box. You can order it online, prepared by chefs and easy to reheat. They feed up to 4 people, so if you have 40 people coming over, you just order 10 of them. It's that easy. Last night, we were able to try one out in advance. They wanted to make sure we could talk about them in an informed fashion. I have to tell you, there is an inclusion in that Christmas, the Ukrainian-inspired dinner box that has been flying under my radar, and it's actually the star of the show. It's the carrots in a creamy dill sauce.
Ooh.
The carrots and the creamy dill sauce. I mean, they had the lazy cabbage rolls and the turkey and the homemade cranberry sauce. I mean, it's just fantastic. But the carrots, I was like, what is with these carrots?
You're appealing to a guy who loves his carrots. So
was that a play on words there? Was I appealing to the guy? All right.
I like that.
Friesen.com. I thought that was pretty good, Johnny. Kudos to you on that one. And later today, I'm excited. I'm actually be heading over. I didn't tell you this, to headquarters, the Edmonton-based headquarters of Apex Automation. I want to go get a sense of what they're working on right now. What's really cool about this place, they do a lot of engineering, fabrication, automation across Canada, the U.S. They're attracting skilled professional engineers from literally all across the country. I met 2 PNs. They just moved here from China to come work for Apex because they love what they're seeing, specifically in coding. That's a big part of automation, of course. Well, Apex develops systems. They test them all out on their home turf at their head offices so there aren't costly delays when they're installing on site. That is one of the many reasons why more and more people are trusting Apex Automation when it comes to their automation needs. You can check them online, apexautomation.ca. We'll check in with our researchers from the University of Calgary in just a second. We're going to talk about toxic masculinity, misogyny in sports, and how it's actually playing out, impacting the national organization Hockey Canada, where it's evident at the FIFA World Cup. Has it maybe been flying under our radar? This is fascinating stuff and a real reality check. But first, I wanted to get to Neil's emails. He wrote this in, this 2 cents on guns, he calls it, to talk at ryanjesperson.com. He says, I grew up in this city, but I was raised and taught to hunt. And I'm really thankful for that. I wouldn't have been given that sort of field-to-table experience that's typically limited to livestock or farm kids, so to speak, otherwise. It gave me great respect for the animals that I eat, a real observation of firearms safety, and insight into the Canadian tradition of hunting. I was actually made fun of in school all the time for guns and hunting, that city kids, they saw no need for it. You know, meat's found in the store. And even though they loved action movies like Terminator 2 or Independence Day, and where the good guy uses a gun, I found them all to be hypocritical. But I just absorbed that mockery. I found that you can't debate people that don't care to learn from the opposing side. And Neil says, I'm proud to be a gun owner. I've never seen a more diverse group of people, actually. We're highly regulated. We go through police checks, doctors, dentists, engineers, farmers, laborers, women, all religions, sexual orientations. At the gun range, it doesn't matter who you are. And as long as you're polite, everybody's your friend. I've never seen any prejudice at play at the range. I see people with a love of the hobby sharing a common interest. He says, did you know, isn't this interesting, in contrast to what Dr. Gotell just said, Neil says, women are actually the fastest growing segment of owners in the handgun market. And new Canadians are often excited to use tools they were not allowed in their home country. Neil says, I reload cartridges because I like the science of ballistics. I like learning about air resistance coefficients. I like designing cartridges and testing them to see if it performs accurately. It's a complicated science, and some of my best advice comes from welders, electricians, machinists, and people from all walks of life. Now, why am I saying this, says Neil? It's because for years, gun owners just did our thing. We were always the punching bag for bad jokes, but other than that, nobody really cared. The RCMP regulated the industry and owners, and life went along per usual. He says the Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, loves wedge issues. My opinion is he's done more to divide Canada than any Prime Minister in past. He's pitting environmentalists against oil workers, gun owners against anti-gun lobbyists, the provinces against one another. He just can't seem to help himself. This story, a politician's number one job is to get elected, and number two, to stay elected. Like the scorpion or the frog, it just seems to be his nature. This current Liberal government, to me, seems like it's just beating on gun owners. They did that order in council to ban those AR-style firearms that are, so dangerous to society, I guess, that they've all got to be taken away. That was in May a couple of years ago, and to this date, they haven't done anything about it. Which, to be quite honest, says Neil, I'm thankful for, because it was my legally acquired property. The RCMP was aware that I had it. They had to allow the purchase. But if these items were so dangerous, wouldn't they have been making moves to take them away more quickly? And instead of telling all owners just to keep them in their basement locked up? Bill 21 was called the handgun ban, and I've been trying to watch some of the debate, and it's been painfully obvious that there doesn't seem to be facts at play to decide which handguns require to be banned. And these anti-gun groups keep using states from the U.S., which to me is not relevant in a conversation about Canada. You got to be trained in Canada. You got to be vetted to own a gun. And when this CCFR, the Canadian Coalition for Firearm Rights, that we've been talking about on the show, Neil says when they were questioned by the Liberals, all they did was quote like mean tweets. They didn't try to prove anything why the bill would make society better and safer. He says Carey Price, the goaltender for the Habs, days before the anniversary of that tragic shooting at École Polytechnique, posted that picture with him hunting, stating that he wasn't the problem. Neil says, from what I saw there, and from the actual text on the post, it doesn't seem to be trying to take away from the tragic event. It's him saying he supports the CCFR. Neil says, now, in my opinion, the CCFR made a mistake responding to that Poly Twitter feed that prompted the entire promo code debacle. He says it's Twitter. It's a dumpster fire. And he says it seems to me that advocacy group, Police Souvien, puts up misleading stats, and it seems to me that the CCFR is trying to correct them. I'm not excusing the CCFR for its mistake, but it also seems like they do a lot of good for the gun community, and it seems like the media, even you, Ryan, wants to put them through the ringer, even for everything that they've done, just for that one mistake. He says, I honestly believe that the Prime Minister added all the hunting rifles last minute just to wedge this issue more. And he says, and I think that it being added right before the anniversary of the tragedy is sickening. That this debate should be run on facts is my number one point. But now emotions are causing sound bites. And he says, and I think that that's taking away from the national conversation. Neil says, as a gun owner, I want laws based on fact for the good of all citizens. If something seems to be a problem, by all means, let's fix it. But it seems like if we fight back on this, we're being pigeonholed as dismissive of a tragedy. He says, I went to school at a technical institute. I saw women around me working or endeavoring to work in STEM. I will always remember these victims, and I will always support women in STEM programs. Neil says, I try really hard to be well-educated on issues. I respect people's opinions. I respect people's freedoms. And as a gun owner, it's hard because no matter what I say, to some, I'm just a redneck hick. I'm still not sure if this is the right reply to your show that'll get people thinking that legal gun owners are not the problem. But if I don't start trying to stand up for my rights, I'm going to lose a hobby that I really enjoy. He says, I just wanted to give you my side to this gun debate. That from Neil. Neil, I appreciate it. And from Real Talkers, whether you agree or not, we'd be very interested in hearing your take, your opinion on what Neil put in front of us. Our next two guests have been putting in months and months of research, extensive research into toxic masculinity, bullying, sexism, homophobia in men's sports. And they've recently published articles, which you can actually check out for yourself at theconversation.com, that address social activism and allyship, in particular in men's soccer, and, of course, relating to the sexual abuse allegations in Canadian hockey, in particular teams that had represented our country, national junior tournaments with Hockey Canada. Dr. Michael Kehler was a high school English teacher, is now a research professor of masculinity studies and education at the Workland School of Education at the University of Calgary, and his research addresses masculinity, sport, allyship, homophobia in education. Meantime, Dr. Gabriel Knott-Fayle is a postdoctoral scholar of masculinity studies and education at the Workland School of Education, U of C. His research focus, masculinity, allyship, transgender discrimination, sports, and sports media. To the both of you, thank you so much for making time for us. Really appreciate you checking in from the UK in particular, Doctor. Well, why don't we talk about how this all came about? Dr. Knott-Fayle, maybe for you first. How did this get on your radar? This is obviously a sort of a specific area of study, but at the same time, there's a lot of stuff to cover, isn't there?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, sport itself is a really significant site where we see lots of issues of masculinity and gender playing out, like the ones that you've mentioned, that often are lumped under the umbrella of toxic masculinity, where specifically we're kind of talking about ideas and practices of kind of misogyny and homophobia and transphobia that are really embedded historically in men's sports, and despite there being some moves to sort of challenge that in the culture of men's sports, they do still remain very entrenched. And we've really seen that come to the fore in the issues that you've mentioned, like the sexual assault allegations with Hockey Canada, and then particularly at the minute with the World Cup in Qatar. Lots of these issues have really come, into the cultural conversation, to the public conversation, to much more than they have done in the past. So for that reason, they're really poignant things to be talking about right now. And as people interested in gender and masculinities and in promoting allyship, sport is a really important site to think about those trends and those issues, right?
I'm grateful that we can have what we'll call sort of an overarching conversation, and we'll cover a lot of subject matter. I think that the Hockey Canada story has been off people's radar to a certain degree. Not everybody, but most people, just because the news cycle moves quickly. But Dr. Kehler, the World Cup is happening as we speak. And obviously there's been a lot of talk about the suitability of the venue, of the nation that's hosting in particular is what I'm talking about. But when we talk in the context of what this conversation or what your research is about, what are some of the red flags or major storylines that you're seeing out of the World Cup?
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. I think what we see here, not unlike hockey, I mean, this sort of punctuates the way in which sport and gender play itself out, and in particular masculinity. And so when we look at FIFA, we look at the World Cup, I think, there's that whole discussion around keeping politics out. And yet we all know that the way in which games are given to certain countries is political in and of itself. And so, the idea that we shouldn't have social responsibility and activism as part of the platform intersecting with sport, I think is really telling in terms of how sport organizations are trying to control a certain kind of narrative and trying to create a sense of, in this case, Qatar and as a place in which sport and sort of downplay issues of inequalities and social injustices. And as Gabriel and I said in our piece, what we think is that this is a really damaging and damaged way in terms of telling athletes about what they can and cannot do when they see social injustices.
I think of some very poignant moments. I think of like Jesse Owens, winning Olympic gold in the 1930s in Hitler's Germany, and I think of John Carlos and Tommy Smith in 1968 in Mexico City raising their fists, black gloved fists in protest. But you look at more recent events, sporting events in particular, the FIFA World Cup and the Olympics. To call a spade, corrupt as hell, in particular FIFA. I mean, people need only look at one of the most recent Netflix documentaries about it, but there is zero tolerance for social activism. I mean, you look at even at the 2022 Men's FIFA World Cup tournament, and the two of you write about this at theconversation.com. People can read it for themselves. I encourage them to. The Danish men's soccer team wants to, celebrate a message of human rights for all. Well, it's deemed a political message that contravenes FIFA regulations, or Team England, right, including Captain Harry Kane and others, wanted to wear an armband that said "One Love" on it. Too political for FIFA. I mean, it just gets to a point where you have to shake your head, don't you? I mean, Dr. Knott-Fayle, do people just need to, I don't mean this seriously, but do people need to lower their expectations of some of the biggest sporting brands or organizers on planet Earth?
Well, yeah, I don't think people should, but I understand why people might in the wake of that seeming inaction. But what you were talking about there, I mean, what it highlights is just what the priorities are for organizations. For example, we got FIFA who will clamp down on those messages, human rights for all, or promoting LGBTQ plus inclusion being deemed too political, right? And so the priorities of organizations like that are clearly not about protecting the rights of marginalized people and challenging injustices against women and LGBTQ plus people, as well as other human rights. But it also shows about the priorities of athletes themselves, because there has to be some responsibility taken by the individuals as well, despite the fact that there is this kind of punitive regime that comes from the top down. And you mentioned Harry Kane and other European countries wanting to wear the One Love armbands, and then deciding not to once FIFA said that they would give them yellow cards, or might give them yellow cards to anyone that was wearing those. And so it shows that the priority for them is winning, right? That's the kind of the culture in the sport, is win at all costs. And so that being the case, when organizations like FIFA, offer the potential for these kinds of sanctions, that seems as too high a price to pay for sort of taking a stand and being an ally for LGBTQ plus people or women. And that's in stark contrast to a lot of the examples you were talking about earlier. We think about Carlos and Smith with their raising their fist. That was a risky move, and that actually cost them their athletic career. And that's not right? Athletes should be able to speak out. There shouldn't be that risk involved. But being an ally and taking action on social injustice means needing to speak out and be active, even when there are certain risks involved. And realistically, like getting a yellow card or an on-field caution shouldn't really be seen as too high a price to pay when we're talking about tackling misogyny. We're talking about tackling homophobia, which are rampant problems, not just in the host nation, in football itself, actually, men's football, or soccer, I should say.
Yeah, you call it whatever you like. We'll pick up on what you're putting down. Dr. Kehler, but it's real talk here. When you start, talking in athletics about toxic masculinity, you know that a portion of this listening audience, and a lot of people that are going to hear this, and you go, oh, here we go. Right, here we go. All right, we're going to, because I think that there's an understanding, and trust me, like the sports we're talking about, in particular hockey, I'm obsessed with hockey. I love hockey. I play it. I watch it. I've worked in hockey. I love it. And I know, and I've been privy to conversations where people believe that if you start talking about these things that are very real issues, that you're going to start talking about softening the sport, that you're going to start talking about compromising the sport, that Canada is potentially going to surrender the stranglehold that it's had on all the gold medals if we start softening up our players and getting away from what's made us successful. So what's the counter argument to that? What does the research tell you?
Well, I think, Ryan, that's a good point. And I think oftentimes people do go to what are we going to lose in changing the culture of sport, and specifically think about hockey, there's always this sort of response from large audiences about we'll not be as good as we once were, as opposed to we actually might be better. We actually, by changing the culture, by creating a much more inclusive culture, for example, by getting rid of the racism and homophobia, for example, we can actually be better than we currently are. But the assumption that and the argument is based in this is the way we've always been, and look how good we've been. That sort of position doesn't acknowledge the fact that we can actually change the ways that we promote hockey, football, soccer, and actually improve our pool of players, and actually create a better sort of training ground, if you will, both for athleticism, but also for social responsibility and activism among athletes. So I think that's the way we have to look at sport, and we have to remind ourselves that these cultures within hockey, football are created, that we purposely promote and valorize certain ways of being athletes. And so to suggest that we're actually going to damage that sport culture by softening the ways our athletes are on and off the pitch, I think needs to be more carefully considered, because our research would show that, we actually can create a greater benefit if we become more inclusive, if we promote different forms and of masculinity, for example, in hockey, and allow people to have a voice and to be able to speak up without fear of being marginalized by other team members.
I would be curious to get both your take, and of course, let me use a hockey example, but feel free to go from there wherever you like. A player like Luke Prokop, he's a prospect, a strapping, tough defenseman, has played in the Western League, and a Nashville Predators prospect. Back in July of 2021, via Instagram, he announced, "I am no longer scared to hide who I am." He says, "Today I'm proud to publicly tell everyone that I'm gay." That was on July 19th of 2021. You can see it here. I'm showing it on my screen. He says, "I wouldn't be able to do this without my amazing family, friends, my agents, who have known this about me and met with me and love and support every step of the way." He says, "I may be new to the community, but I'm eager to learn about the strong and resilient people who came before me." And he's posted about it subsequently. For example, in October of that year, on National Coming Out Day, he says representation matters. He's posing with one of his hockey sticks, which is wrapped with pride tape, which was developed out of Edmonton, Alberta, a really neat initiative. How significant is something like this in a sport as tough or as bro-y or as macho as hockey?
Yeah, well, they're right. It's right that representation is very, very important, and it rightly deserves to be celebrated and praised. Right. There's something that we do mention in one of the pieces, the piece around the World Cup, is like the fact that this stuff is still so worthy of praise, and that it requires so much courage. To come out in such a bro culture is kind of further evidence, I guess, of the difficulties of being LGBTQ, of not living up to those kind of sort of homophobic expectations of what it means to be a man. So it kind of, yes, it deserves celebrating. It also points to like there's still an entrenched problem with sexuality in men's sport.
So what do we do about it?
Well, I mean, we need to think about what do we. There needs to be a big shift in the culture and the priorities in men's sport.
I agree with you, but like how?
Practically,
yeah.
Yeah, I think practically, Ryan. I mean, what we are witnessing, I think, currently, if you think about Hockey Canada, is a real purposeful way of changing in terms of, if you think about the report that just came out from Hockey Canada, 900 incidents of discrimination, many of which, 60% or so, that were based on gender and sexual orientation. So being more transparent about what our culture, sport culture, looks and sounds like, I think is one step in the right direction. That we need to actually acknowledge what sport culture is like on the basis of what kind of incidents of discrimination actually exist there, as opposed to denying that we have a problem in sport culture, which has been a long narrative. And so to your point, how do we do this? Well, we start by being very public, and we engage. I think, in this case, thinking about referees and educating them about what does discrimination look like, and how do you respond to discrimination, and what are the consequences. I think, again, education being a key foundation for not only the referees, but I think also for parents, which I believe are well and open to helping support players change the ways in which they promote ways of being boys and men, particularly in hockey culture.
Dr. Knott-Fayle, I want to ask you this before we thank you both for your time. Your research focus in particular takes a look at transgender discrimination in sport. And I wonder if maybe that is an entirely separate conversation. Is that a conversation that exists on an island? Is it fair to suggest that the average citizen might acknowledge that they better understand the L, the G, than they do the T in LGBTQ? You know what I'm saying? Like, is there a lack of understanding and awareness around the real issues that transgender people, in particular athletes, face that maybe precludes or stands in the way of a better understanding of that specific area of your research?
Yes, yeah, that has a very unique set of circumstances around it, I guess. A very unique flavor to it when I have that conversation. Yeah. When I am talking about that side of the research, the reaction from audiences is very different to the reactions that I get when we're talking about this kind of thing. It's much more polarized. So it is a very, very polarized topic at the minute, like globally, right? But particularly in the UK, in the US, right? And as well as in Canada, but particularly in those places, we're seeing a really drastic polarization around when it comes to trans rights, and actually trans rights in sports is probably even more kind of polarizing and controversial than it is in the rest of society. It's a space where the kind of arguments for trans exclusion are much more kind of prevalent, and people are much more willing to express them, whereas there's a bit more of a taboo around that, and a recognition of the need for inclusion in other aspects of society. An interesting contrast, I guess, to what we're talking about now is that kind of entire conversation revolves around women's sport, right? It's trans women's participation that's really all of the media attention is on. Yeah. If we were talking about it, that's what we would be talking about, because generally people aren't as up in arms about the idea of trans men competing in men's sport.
Yeah. I mean, if I can state it plainly, at risk of stepping in one, I mean, I can't say the general consensus, but when you look at the pushback, it's that trans women have the understanding is that trans women have a physical advantage over other athletes competing in women's sports. And you don't hear the same pushback when it's the other way around, when it's trans men competing in admittedly more rare circumstances, right?
Mm. Yeah, that's the argument. Yeah.
And what do you tell? What's the counter argument? I mean, do you believe is that untrue or inaccurate?
Well, to be honest, this is opening a whole conversation that would require its own segment.
That's why people download this show.
What I say, this is a whole new segment that we need for this. But
yeah,
basically, it clearly if someone's gone through male puberty, right, there is going to be some differences in physiology, right, but there's surprisingly little actual physiological testing on the effects of going through hormone replacement therapy on physical capabilities, right? And so there's research being done at Loughborough University, for example, which is addressing that gap, because it's a gap that a lot of people assume has been filled, but it hasn't. A lot of it is a lot of the assumptions are based on testing cisgender men and cisgender women with each other, right? Now, I'm not a physiologist, so I can't really speak to that. I can't give you anything conclusive, except that all sports are different and require very different physical attributes, so you can't have a blanket rule across all sports. And someone who was doing the physiological testing explained it to me in the fact of some people bring up the fact that, for example, if you've gone through male puberty, you might have bigger bone structure, heavier bone structure. Now, if you go through HRT and you've got less muscle mass, you're then trying to move a big, heavy frame, or a bigger, heavier frame with less propulsion, right? So in that sense, people actually lose certain amounts of power compared to cisgender women, right? So that's like a very unscientific explanation of a scientific thing. But the point
I appreciate it.
It's not as conclusive, and also it's very different sports. So depending on what attributes are needed for different sports, then it needs to be looked at much more rigorously and on a sport-to-sport basis. And also, from my perspective, it needs to come from the point of view of the starting point is inclusion. How can we make this an inclusive space? Because that's got to be the priority for me. And we're talking, today about the need to tackle these kind of like issues of LGBTQ plus people being excluded from men's sport and, in this case, women's sport. And so, if we're going to do that, there needs to be a recognition that's kind of got to be the drive. But of course, we need to look more into it, and we can. If you look at Loughborough University, doing this research, that you can find out more.
I feel like, and this is not to like, I'm not pretending. Like, I think that transgender people just started to exist on planet Earth, but it does feel like a relatively new conversation. And I think that part of that is because I think that the general public doesn't feel educated enough on it. And I also feel like talk shows are nervous to host these conversations. And I want to make a commitment to this audience and to the guests that appear on this show that will go there and that will bring on reputable guests that will be able to have gutsy conversations. And Dr. Kehler, I can tell by the way that your posture changed and the gleam in your eye when this conversation started going down this path that you are all for these types of uncomfortable conversations. In fact, I think we need more uncomfortable conversations, don't we?
Yeah, most definitely. And I agree with you. I mean, you did notice my gleam in my eye, but this is exactly where I think we need to have more public dialogue. And as you've already said, Ryan, let's not steer away from this. I think only through better understanding, through promoting healthy, respectful sort of dialogue, that we can actually, better support diverse athletes, and also we can start to create safer places. And again, as I said earlier, I mean, this is about intentionally promoting and supporting more inclusive sport arenas rather than falling back to the way it's always been.
We've been talking to, that was Dr. Michael Kehler that you just heard, and really appreciate as well Dr. Gabriel Knott-Fayle joining us from the UK, both of them contributing authors to pieces that you can read, in particular on the FIFA World Cup 2022 and the Hockey Canada scandal. You'll find them both at theconversation.com, and if you can find both of these expert voices on Twitter as well. Just check out the tweet that we sent out from our official account, Real Talk RJ, earlier this morning before the show went to our live stream. Thanks for making time for us, both of you. I suspect that our paths will cross again.
Thank you very much.
Pleasure. Thanks very much.
Yeah, you bet. And Real Talkers, we welcome your feedback on this. There are so many things, obviously, to talk about. I feel like sometimes, John, you have conversations like that.
That was a cavalcade of...
Yeah, it's just like open a can, open a can, open a can, open a can. And of course, you could spend I feel
3
like
shows.
In particular, Dr. Knott-Fayle was like, he was like, well, that's kind of like a whole other thing.
Yeah.
And part of me goes, like, the warning voice in my head is going, are we equipped to start having this conversation about transgender athletes in sport? But I think also, we call real talk, real life. People have these real kinds of conversations, like at hockey arenas and at soccer fields
and at home
and at tennis clubs and at home.
And that's good. But like, I feel like even when you say something like toxic masculinity nowadays, people cringe, right? It's like on the right more than the left. But then on the left, if you use a word like woke, they cringe. And it's like all these words that are weaponized now. And it's like when we're talking and trying to talk about toxic masculinity, and we're all still learning, I'm still learning, we're not trying to say like being a man is toxic. We're not trying to say being a good father or a good like a jacked up fireman going into a building and saving children and women is toxic masculinity, is bad. Yeah. We're talking about like, and here's another, another one of those flag words, like bro culture. And I know bros. I know guys who you would consider like bros or whatever.
Do they have white sunglasses?
They wear Oakleys in the summer, and yes, they do have white trim. But they're not assholes. Yeah. You know what I mean? They're not toxic. You can be a bro, but not toxic. You can be manly without. There's this guy. I'll show a picture. There's this guy on Instagram and TikTok. My wife loves him. Jacked up lumberjack guy. He chops wood, and every week or month he chops a bigger and bigger piece.
That's his Instagram. He just chops wood.
He just chops wood, and women love it, men love it, we all love it. This is great. This isn't toxic. Like, we're not saying everything manly is toxic, but like I said, I know bros and stuff, and they're not. The main thing is when it gets bad enough that you're infringing on someone else's happiness, someone else's rights.
Safety.
Like, everyone should just be able to do it as long as you're not hurting children or, you know what I mean? You're obeying the law. You should be able to be and do what you want and be happy.
I mean, the story about the Hockey Canada story is of an enabling and permissive culture that allowed for, encouraged, and covered up crimes, sexual crimes over a series of decades, and it's demanding a bigger conversation around the culture of sport and the culture of celebrity and a whole bunch of other things that need to be taken seriously. Mm-hmm. There's no doubt about it. You can't deny that. I mean, Hockey Canada, people call it the Hockey Canada scandal. It's not the Hockey Canada issue. It's not the Hockey Canada flare-up. It is a scandal because it is a beloved national brand under which crimes against human beings were perpetuated and covered up.
And it's not just the boys.
That's
it's
a fact.
Like the agents, like, you hear those rumors that maybe the agents told them, when they're with girls, make sure you get on videotape them saying, like, that whole thing, like the whole way we're approaching and handling all these situations is just wrong. It needs fixing. It needs huge fixing.
Talk at ryanjesperson.com is where you can send us your thoughts on this. Obviously, this is a continuing conversation, right? I mean, virtually everything on this show is. And a lot of times that's prompted by our audience that, someone's going to be listening to this while they're walking their dog, and this is going to resonate with you in a specific way. And it was Neil that wrote in about gun control. Tomorrow I'm going to be reading an email from Jenny. She's Jewish, and she's writing in about Kanye, and like it's a powerful, powerful message. But we understand that sometimes you walk with these things and you take the time to reflect on them, and we want to know how our content, how what we talk about is landing and resonating with you. Think of big strapping first responders. What about Tad Milmine, who came on the show with us, like the Calgary police officer who's like out and proud. He's a proud gay man, and the guy is like an anti-bullying advocate. He's a survivor of horrific circumstance. Tad was like, you can Google it. Just Google Tad Milmine Real Talk, and you can check out his interview on the show. The guy was like literally locked in a cage when he was a kid and left in the basement, like literally. I mean, this guy, when you use the word survivor, this guy is a survivor, and he understands it, and he understands discrimination and bullying, and now there he is in a very you look at, not to say that there haven't been, female police officers, non-binary police officers many years. Of course there have been, but you want to talk about like male-dominated or bro-y professions. Policing is one. Like, I don't think that that's a controversial statement.
We think of police, we think of firemen, we think of the bulky guy.
But then you also talk to people that work in policing, and is it always the beefcake? Is it always the bouncer that you need showing up to the call? Not always.
And nowadays, especially with everything going on where, you're going on wellness checks and you're having to deal with mental health issues. Like the big bulky beefy guy is not really going to help these days, right?
Yeah, no kidding.
Not that they don't help in certain situations.
Leslie says men who are thoughtful, kind, clever, have a great sense of humor. Those are great traits. Toxic masculinity is not appealing. She says, I sure enjoyed this talk. Tracy says, I'd love to hear from well-educated young men on this topic.
I like that comment.
Yeah, that's cool. We're always looking for, we're working on a roundtable. I don't want to put a date on it yet because we're waiting on one guest in particular, but we've been working on a roundtable around subtle sexism. And I think it's going to be great because the two panelists we have confirmed that are like locked and loaded, ready to go, are working in professions where it is evident, where it impacts them on a daily basis. And I think that that's going to be a great conversation as well. Kimberly wants to know about items in the news. She wants to know my thoughts on 5 million bottles of unapproved Tylenol. This is a story. Yeah. I'm going to be honest with you, Kimberly. I've just sort of scratched the surface on this one. This is the Alberta government. Premier Danielle Smith confirmed, like any parent knows, it's probably been on your radar that there's been a shortage, like a national shortage of kids' meds, basically, including, kids' Tylenol and Advil and all the fever meds that kids need. You can, in particular, it's an issue, I think, for families with infants. With kids. This is not medical advice. Do not take this as medical advice. Do not listen to me. But I know for a lot of parents, they say if you have like a 5 or 6 or a 7 or an 8 or a 10-year-old, you can like crush up an adult pill and use like half of it or something like that for kids. But for infants, it's a totally different ball game. And I know with so many kids sick across the country, it's been a real issue. And my understanding of this issue, again, I'm flying a little bit blind into the clouds here, which is a talk show host. You got to check yourself. I mean, unless you're a super popular talk show host with millions of followers, and then you don't have to care at all what you say.
No.
But we care a little bit. And so my understanding is that some of this has had to do with different approval processes, like Health Canada versus the FDA, and Canada's had a hard time bringing in meds, and it's not that easy. And shelves at stores and pharmacies have been empty or virtually empty for a long time. And so Danielle Smith announcing yesterday that the Alberta government has procured about 5 million bottles of children's Tylenol, as I understand it. But it's something about it, it's not approved by Health Canada. Number one, I think that off the top of my head, and again, forgive me if I'm missing a main point here. Number one, I think it's a good thing that the government's going out and doing something about it to try to get meds for kids. Number two, I think this could be interesting, and you wonder if it's another intentional wedge. Maybe I'm just looking for a political storyline here, or maybe it's legit. But if it's unapproved by Health Canada, then it allows a province like Alberta to put more pressure on the feds. I mean, you look back at what happened around the vaccines when Canada was trying to procure vaccines, but because we didn't manufacture them on Canadian soil. Remember, we talked about that on the show. We talked about, the intellectual security, the developmental security of having our own labs and being able to do our own research and develop our own products. Feels like an eternity ago, doesn't it? But what did the provinces do? The provinces put a lot of pressure on the feds, right? At that time, Alberta Premier Jason Kenney, Ontario's Premier Doug Ford was outspoken about this, and others. I mean, John Horgan, you remember the BC Premier at the time was hosting the First Ministers Conference, all the other premiers, and they were like calling out the feds and Health Canada, saying we need more support, we need more funding, we need more attention to this. The provinces and the feds have always done that dance when it comes to administering health care in particular. And so I think that this could be an interesting one if Alberta can say, listen, we've got 5 million bottles ready to go, but the feds won't fast track the approval process, so we can't get this into the hands of families. And you have a sick kid, and you perceive this now to be Justin Trudeau that's standing in the way of your kid getting that bottle of Tylenol. And Danielle Smith's able to say, we did everything we could. We got 5 million bottles sitting in the airport, sitting there waiting to go in one of the loading docks. I don't know. Those are my initial thoughts. This is a developing story. Watt on the text line, that's a great handle, says there's a North American shortage of kids' Tylenol, not just Canada. I'll take your word for it. I'm sure that's probably accurate. Says all medications require Health Canada approval. And I don't think... I don't know if you can get into situations where you start relaxing the approval process.
I don't like that, no.
That sounds to me to be a dangerous exercise. It's a dangerous precedent to set. Yeah. So anyway, those are my initial thoughts. And I always want to be candid with you, but I'm sure I have some more reading to do on it, and I'll give you my word that I will. Donna says, I've got Donna just got over a 3-week cold. Says, boy, was I ever stressed out. My ribs hurt so bad from coughing. I thought I had pneumonia. You look at what's going on And Supriya and I talk about this a little bit. You can check out seriouslypod.com. The strain that children's hospitals are feeling across the country right now. It's just unbelievable stuff. We're not out of the woods, not even close when it comes to kids' illness. Okay, so these are a lot of things that can be a bit of a gut punch. Everybody ready for some fresh mountain air? Anybody ready to take a second?
Please.
Everybody ready to just leave the reality of the news cycle behind and maybe visit Jasper National Park? Here's some great ideas on holiday gifts for the mountain lover in your life. MyJasper Memories is presented by Tourism Jasper every Wednesday here on the show. So here are a few things. If it's getting down to crunch time now, you got a few weeks until stockings are going to need to be stuffed on top of what Santa's going to bring. You want something perfect under the tree? What about a surprise? Pack somebody's bag, pick them up at work, and off you go for the weekend. For a friend who loves a deal, may we tell you about the Marmot Escape Card, right? For your friend that loves riding Canada's best snow, snagging an amazing discount, almost as fun as hitting the slopes. I mean, maybe not entirely, but you can help them out with a Marmot Escape Card. It gives the recipient half off lift tickets all season long. Yeah, no blackout days, no lines, all happiness. And with Marmot's unique parking lot layout, which I love, you can ski straight back to your car to enjoy a packed lunch. Because the chalets do have limited capacity regulations. There's nothing like skiing. You can literally...
Right into it? Oh.
You ride right to your tailgate.
Burger and a beer.
Oh, it's the best. It's the best. Okay, so what about for the gear junkie? There's a new adventure equipment. Like, experiences are, of course, fabulous gifts. Don't get us wrong. But there's something undeniably fun about getting a gift card that you can use to get a new toy to play with, right? And what's more fun, or what's more healthy for that matter, than great gear that's going to help with future adventures? Local Jasper retailers stock everything from rugged garb fit for backcountry adventures to fashionable Rocky Mountain attire, like John wears with his plaid, to top-of-the-line ski gear. You can get ready to venture in style, and you can learn more about that at jasper.travel. They've got a Things to Do link. Then you can go shopping virtually before you head out to Jasper and visit the stores yourself. And for the nearest and dearest, I mean, these ones we're talking about, these are the gifts, the ones that people are going to remember for a lifetime. Nothing says romance or quality time with the family like an evening spent relaxing fireside with a glass of wine, delicious comfort food, and a board game or a book. Jasper National Park has 4 winter cabin properties. You can check them out all at jasper.travel. Check out the blogs link there. If you're staying, by the way, in particular at the Fairmont Jasper Park Lodge, you can also inquire about a winter sleigh ride. There is nothing like it. Make your Jasper memories today, starting with a visit to jasper.travel. And of course, when you're out there, if you're posting on Instagram or Twitter, we'd love to see what you have. Your videos, your photos could be featured in a future edition of MyJasper Memories here on Real Talk if you use the hashtags MyJasper and Real Talk RJ. Presented every Wednesday by Tourism Jasper. Do you have a favorite board game? Are you a board game guy?
I'm not a big board game guy. I've got a friend who I met in Kelowna. Shout out to Mark D. He's a radio personality, and he just... he has got just every board game imaginable, and the ones I've never even heard of. And I went over and just looked at his shelves one day. I was like, oh my gosh. Like, I was like the Game of Life or like Operation. This guy's into like the Settlers of Catan, all the complicated ones where you got to like be explained for 30 minutes before how to play. And, What about you?
Well, Carrie and I, we like, there's nothing like it. I don't think we do it enough, and we want to do it more. We always resolve to do it more. But a night of board games, like either just as a date night, the two of us, or having a crew together, I think is so much fun. I know that there's the big ones like Risk. I've never really got into that one, but I love like Monopoly's a lot of fun.
Cheating.
Well, I kind of like, I actually suck at Monopoly. I'm just not very good at it because I think it reflects my own sort of fiscal management shortcomings.
I was just
you know what I You know what I'm saying? But yeah, like there are some great board games out there. And then, but one year for Christmas, we said, well, let's beef up our board game collection. So why don't we gift each other a board game? And we got new ones. I went into a store that specializes in it, and I was like, there's all the classics that everybody plays all the time. Like as a family, we played a wonderful game called Scattergories for years that like brings me back. Oh my gosh, there's so many amazing memories. But we wanted to get new ones, and we discovered the new ones kind of suck.
Yeah.
I think the classics are classics because they're classic.
They're incredible.
Yeah, I know I sound like the stay off my lawn. We used to walk uphill both ways to school guy, but that's this impression.
I enjoy the themed ones though. Last year, my wife got me the Game of Thrones board game.
Ooh,
I'm obsessed with Game of Thrones, so that was pretty good. But then those, you play them like twice, and the show's over. You're like, okay, this is done. But you're right, like Monopoly, all those classics, they never die.
Yeah. Yeah, shout out Scattergories. I would say that's probably that's like my favorite. It's my favorite one. Yeah. And if you fancy yourself to be a bit of a wordsmith, the most wonderful
Scrabble?
moment in Scattergories is when you are accused of cheating by a family member with a great deal of emotion in the plea that they're making to the collective, and then they must acknowledge upon presentation of receipts that you are not cheating at Scattergories. In fact, you get your points. I'm talking like specifically to my brothers and sister right now. We have a lot of fun over the years. These conversations wouldn't happen on Real Talk without the Dairy Queens of Northwest Edmonton and Sherwood Park, and they want to remind you right now about a couple of things. Number one, no matter what you're celebrating this holiday season, no matter what your family tradition is, no matter what your religious conviction is, no matter where you're going to be or who the crowd is, a DQ cake is always a perfect fit. You can enjoy layers of celebration with a DQ cake that makes any occasion a happy occasion. You can go to dqcakes.com right now. Use the drop-down menu to find the locations in Palisades, Nemeo, Newcastle Westmount, in Edmonton, or Sherwood Park on Baseline Road. And don't forget as well, the Dairy Queen gift card is a perfect stocking stuffer, so the Dilly Bar or Buster Bar lover in your life can stock up their freezer. I'm projecting what your Christmas gift is going to be this year, John. I know it. Our friends at Eden Landscaping, they use the winter months to make sure that all the reports are pulled, the designs are made, the plans are drawn up, the construction materials are ordered, so when the snow melts and the ground thaws, hopefully in March, maybe April, they'll be able to break ground on your brand new project, bringing your outdoor space to life. Check out their portfolio today at landscapeedmonton.ca. Yesterday, we featured the natural beauty in Balmoral Heights. If you're more of like an ultra-modern person, you like that clean and modern landscape design to maybe match your new dream home, check out what they did, sourcing materials from a concrete contractor to create custom structural and architectural concrete items. They had a carpenter bring cedar from Vancouver Island. They consulted a nursery to use local lush plant design. I mean, all of the highlights at landscapeedmonton.ca. You can get your quote from Mike and his team. You let them know you heard about him on Real Talk. If you're going to be looking for a new ride, the next snowy highway trip, the next roadie with the family, you don't want to be slipping and sliding, joining everybody else in the ditch, why not check out the new lineup of Jeeps, including the classic Grand Cherokee and that very popular Grand Wagoneer at Sherwood and St. Albert Dodge. They've got some great year-end sales specials on right now, including up to $5,000 in total discounts, $5,500 in fact, on some of the Grand Cherokee lineups. You can find the pre-owned and new specials featured online, and of course the Ram 1500, North America's most decorated pickup, online at St. Albert and Sherwood Dodge. And our friends at Local Environmental Services want to remind you that we've got Trash Talk coming up a little bit later on this week. On Fridays, per usual, at Local Environmental Services, they've been keeping it local for 25 years, still family-owned. You can learn who is local. Check out their core values online at localenvironmental.ca. You're going to be like, core values for a garbage and recycling company? Yeah. Why? Because they're a family-owned business. They know you care about your family-owned business, and they believe that the communities that they operate in deserve better. Check them out online today at localenvironmental.ca. We've got kind of a cool show coming up tomorrow, and the way that it's worked out, we wanted to give you a heads up, Real Talkers. We're going to be talking to two of our audience members through yesterday's show. You see Métis Sharon in the chat from time to time, right? Well, she's at COP15 in Montreal. She's presenting on Métis traditions, so she's going to join us from Montreal. Plus, Aggie, you've seen her checking in from the Czech Republic. She moved there from Canada a year ago last week. She observed that anniversary, and it gave her lots to think about. She's a politico. She has a great deal of conviction on some of the issues that we've addressed here on the show. We're going to go deep with why she made the move, what she's learned. And of course, we're going to be keeping it real. That's coming up on Thursday's show. We'll see you then.
Real Talk is hosted by Ryan Jesperson, executive producer Josh Dunford, technical producer John Hicks, general manager Katie Cook-Chivers, account coordinator Lawrence Derlego, human resources Lena Shepard, website design Mike Johnston, voiceover by me, Carrie Skelton. Real Talk's editorial board is Supriya Dwivedi, Ahmed Ali, Brandy Morin, Ann Castleman, Corey Hogan, Harman Kandola, Catherine O'Neill, and Chris Henderson. Member Emerita, Julie Rohr. Real Talk is recorded in Edmonton, Alberta on Treaty 6 territory, the traditional and ancestral territory of the Cree, Dene, Blackfoot, Saulteaux, and Nakota Sioux, home to the Métis settlements and the Métis Nation of Alberta. Real Talk is a relay project. For more, check out ryanjesperson.com.